You ask me, whether I approve of violence. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists.
Do I or do I not use this mic? Also, I'm sick, by the way. 1, 2, 3. Okay, this is like my third time recording this video and I'm sick, but we're gonna do this. An institutionalized method of terrorism. I read this quote when I was reading Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks, and it inspired this entire video creation. And I have a few things that I want to talk about. Intersectionality shows up everywhere, truly everywhere, and I want to go back in history and connect us to things that are happening in today's times. The goal of this video is to go back in history, particularly with Black people, talking about slavery and how this institutionalized method of terrorism on Black people and communities has instilled a very long-term fear in these communities, an intentional fear created, and how that connects us to what we see today in today's climate and violence. I want to understand how these systems were formed early in past America and how that influences what we see today and the violence that we see today on Black and brown communities. I want to understand how America was shaped, particularly with slavery. So the two main sections that I'll be talking about is number one, the institutionalized method of terrorism on Black communities during slavery, and that's talking about the past, setting up this lifelong kind of fear for Black communities. And the second section, I will be talking about now, present day America, and how that past has shaped us to where we are today, and how a lot of the violence that we saw back then presents itself today. Yeah, okay, that's not funny. I want to give a disclaimer that number one, these are my own interpretations and in some cases my own opinions. I want to use a couple of quotes that I read, but I want to connect them in my own way. Obviously, this is a topic that I thought of, and so some of these will be opinions. You may maybe disagree, but a lot of this is just historical findings, so it's like you can't really disagree about that. Anyway, also I want to talk about intersectionality. I took a course, actually it was like my first college class was on race and ethnicity, and intersectionality is a very interesting topic and it shows up everywhere. I think that's like a whole different thing that I want to talk about, but I just want to put that out there that like intersectionality, it's a good word. And it's in talking about Black women during slavery, Angela Davis contends that there was an institutionalized method of terrorism on Black women. She later says, in a quote here, she might be most conveniently manipulated if the master contrived a random system of sorts. I'm gonna start that over. I'm sorry. She later says, too, in another quote, that she might be most conveniently manipulated if the master contrived a random system of sorts, forcing her to pay with her body for foods, etc. Bell Hooks also talks about this being an intentional violence, particularly for women slaves that were in the house with white families day to day. So the maids and caretakers for white families, there was an increased motivation to instill a fear of violence, a threat of rape, for fear of uproar in the home. So in order to encourage Black slaves that were working with white families not to create an uproar in their home, let's say poison the food of white families or create a fire in the house, there was a fear of retaliation created intentionally by white masters at this time, so that house slaves would fear punishment, was to have a negative psychological impact on the psyche of Black men and women. Okay, that was wrong. I don't know why I had to say men first. Okay. Let's do that again. The goal in slavery, particularly with the house slaves, was to have a negative psychological impact on the psyche of Black women and men, to ensure that there was so much terror and evil acts committed by white people at this time that slaves would fear any uproar and submit passively to the will of the white master. Not just Obviously, this was not just during slavery. Slavery saw the brunt of this violence and intentional fear that was created. Slavery may have been the most cruel, although that's hard to say. There was so much cruelty. Slavery was not just the most cruel and violent, evil, sadistic acts committed by white people. Later, we have Jim Crow era. During this time, the now freed slaves were now looking for work for pay in order to get food, in order to provide for their families. And unfortunately, a lot of these times, they had to look back to their white masters that committed these acts of violence and terror against them in order to provide for their families. And in some cases, this was sharecropping. I'll show a graphic here that describes a little bit about sharecropping, but white masters still held all entirely of the power. They controlled the land. They could set the pay very low for slaves that were looking for work now. And this kind of starts the system of power and wealth that we see translated in today's America. White people owned a lot of land. Black people did not have the means to own this land. They didn't have money. They were starting from zero. They could set the rates for these now freed slaves for working rates that were very low pay, and they held all the power. It reminds me a lot of what we see today with today's politicians, with today's billionaires, and it's just a continuous cycle. The white power system focuses on disparities, creating a wealth disparity, a very large wealth gap between white people and black people, ensuring that the only way that black people can earn money is through you, the enslaver. These years of torment by white people have obvious long-term effects. We know the lasting effects of things like redlining, colorism, sexism, and the psychological effect placed. Okay, doesn't make sense. The psychological effect that slavery had, the terror, evil that was placed, has lasting effects. Some of us may have great grandparents that were freed slaves, and we hear a lot of the stories and narratives told down by ancestor to ancestor. They echo in the stories that our parents tell us, in the warnings that they tell us. And some of these stories may not be as violent. The warnings that black mothers told their children during slavery to warn them about the rape by white masters. They may be slightly shifted, but they're still violent in nature. These warnings may look like always comply with law enforcement, police officers, don't seem threatening in public. We hope to warn our community and those that we care about in order to fend off potential violence. These terroristic means of violence, evil, sadistic acts committed on blacks, carry and hold so much weight now. These stories matter a lot. They matter so much in how we talk to those that we care about and love, how our parents talk to us in order to warn us about violence. These stories matter in the way that we talk to our relatives, telling them to avoid sundown towns, to avoid conflicts with police officers, to present day. I say all this to say I feel a very similar sentiment in the tellings of ICE raids and violence on black and brown communities that I see today and hear about today. It is all very unfortunate. It is all very different. We're in a different space, but a lot of the violence and fear that's instilled, it continues, and it has continued today. The ultimate goal of these people of power, wealthy people that have the ability to bend laws at their will and control, is to terrorize minorities into submission, to create widespread fear that is not just for today, not just for now. The goal is to create a generation of fear that we tell our kids, that we pass down stories of violence that we see inflicted on people that we care about and love. And on the flip side of this, racism still presents itself for this reason too. White families tell similar stories about the negatives of Black people committing crimes. People are how they rely on government assistance, how lazy they are, and how Black men don't raise their children. We see this in how racism is still very much alive in America. And it's never usually this plain talk, like Black people are lazy and they suck and they kill everyone. There's a lot of subliminal messaging in there are a lot of dog whistles that politicians use when talking about Black people. There's a lot of subliminal language with religion too, and how we see people as pure, impure, a lot of language around Black people, white people, and everything in between, but that's a little bit different topic, white Christian value belief. We know the fear of violence that are told to us by our relatives, grandparents, parents, and some of the warnings like come home when the streetlights come on. Don't go down a dark alleyway at night. Things happen and it creates a warning in our community. We know to be nice to the blue-eyed, quiet man in a black hoodie sitting in the back of the train. Be nice to him. Say hi. He could have something in his pocket. There's a reason that we tell these stories. There's sometimes an unfortunate situation or story that comes behind these signals and warnings that we tell our community and those that we care about. In some cases, this may be discrimination, unfortunately, to avoid certain patterns and characteristics that we feel may lead to some potential violence. It's not always right, but when you're conditioned to think a certain way, it can be hard to get out of this pattern of thinking. All in all, I believe the goal that was created during slavery is very much here today. The goal, which it has always really been, is to create this system of fear that continues for generations. These people of power are ensuring that minorities, whoever they may be classified as, do not get out of line in a way. And if they do, their freedoms, their simple freedoms, may be stripped away. A lot of times, the simple freedoms being stripped away hit Black and brown communities at an alarmingly larger rate than white communities. Okay. The people under attack are Black, they're brown, they're women, they are gay. Think about incarceration, people that are behind bars. Sometimes you may want to ask, do Black people just commit more crimes? Is that it? Do they just commit more crimes? Is that what it is? No. We are punished more for less severe action. We are given less chances to correct our mistakes. We are simply seen as less human. Okay. Punishing those of color, terrorizing these communities, committing violence against these communities has been a history in America. I want to use this word very intentionally because America is very intentional with how it uses words, who it uses against, and when it's used. What was seen during slavery, white masters committing acts of terrorism against Black slaves, was not just to create a fear in the moment, it was to assert power. It was to dehumanize these people so that they would see themselves as less than. These evil acts were intended to evoke the psyche of Black people. It would be easier to just commit willy-nilly. I'm sorry. It would be easy to just commit violence against Black people randomly at will, kill people randomly at will, but it was intentional. But a lot of these acts were power show, display, assert power, induce control, dehumanize those, and distract from their own vision of their own humanness. They want minorities to see themselves as less than. It's not enough that the white man sees everyone else as less than. They want to create systems in which minorities see themselves as less than too. They see their families being separated behind cages. They feel powerless in court systems. And they must rely on assistance from other sources than their own to provide for essential food, shelter, etc. These systems were never broken in America. I think we had a little bit of time where we didn't see as much violence, but it's encouraged in a way now blowing up. I don't know. I don't know if I'm just getting older, but there's a lot of violence out here for no reason. For no reason. The goal is not just to criminalize those, but to create a power so great that the rest don't see their own selves as worthy of love, care, treatment, of food, of shelter, of humanness. To dehumanize. To create a controlled, intentional method of stripping away womanness in black women, and a sense of powerless in black men. The visual mediums of putting people in cages shows to symbolize humans with animals. We use cages to capture and tame animals. We use these cages for black and brown people, not for wrongdoing, not for violent acts committed, not for criminal activity, but for simply being seen as less than. Their voice is not valued, and it should be. The end. Thank you. I also want to talk about how a lot of these issues hit black women a lot harder because of intersectionality. Um, and I want that to be upcoming. And yeah, here are some quotes. The nakedness of the African female served as a constant reminder of her sexual vulnerability. The threat of rape or other physical brutalization inspired terror in the psyches of displaced African females. The traumatic experience of African women and men aboard slave ships were the initial stages of an indoctrination process that would transform the African free human being into a slave. An important part of the slaver's job was to effectively transform the African personality aboard ships so that it would be marketable as a docile slave to the American colonies. Period. Thank you for listening, and I hope that I can continue this, and thank you. Bye. Bye. Uh, the goal is not. Mothers told their children during slavery in order to. Mothers told their children during slavery. A random system of sorts. I'm gonna start that over. I'm sorry. The traumatic experience of African women and men aboard. The traumatic experience of African women and men abroad. Abroad. Okay.